They left me standing alone in a foreign airport with nothing but the clothes on my back and $3 in my purse. After watching my husband fight through 11 brutal surgeries, after holding his hand as he took his final breath, my own daughter and her husband abandoned me like a piece of garbage they no longer needed. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you handed them your entire life? Have you ever loved so deeply that you would sign any document, go anywhere, do anything they asked without question? I did. And that trust nearly destroyed me. My name is Eleonora, and the person who betrayed me wasn't some stranger or distant relative. It was my own flesh and blood. My daughter Lydian, the child I raised with every ounce of love in my heart, the same daughter I taught to paint, to read, to find beauty in life's smallest moments. She looked me in the eye and left me stranded thousands of miles from home while she rushed back to steal everything my husband had worked his entire life to build. But here's what she didn't count on, what none of them expected. They thought they were leaving behind a broken, grieving widow who would simply fade away into nothing. They thought wrong. Do you know what it feels like when the person you brought into this world, the child you sacrificed everything for, becomes the architect of your destruction? It's a pain that goes deeper than any physical wound, a betrayal that cuts through your soul and leaves you questioning everything you ever believed about love, about family, about trust itself. For 32 years, I lived what I thought was a fairy tale. I met Mikhail when I was 23, a brilliant architect with gentle hands and eyes that saw beauty in everything around him. He was my anchor, my strength, my partner in building a life that felt like it was pulled straight from the pages of a love story. We created a home that wasn't just walls and furniture, but a sanctuary filled with laughter, creativity, and dreams for the future. When Lydian was born, I thought our happiness was complete. I stepped away from my own artistic career without a second thought, pouring all of my energy into raising this precious child and supporting Mikhail's growing success. I never saw it as a sacrifice. Every moment felt like a privilege. Teaching Lydian to mix watercolors, reading bedtime stories by lamplight, watching Mikhail's face light up when he came home to find us dancing in the kitchen. These were the moments that made life worth living. But success has a way of changing people. And somewhere along the way, our perfect world began to crack. Mikhail's generosity toward Lydia knew no bounds. Designer clothes, expensive vacations, luxury cars. If she wanted it, he provided it. I tried to teach her the value of hard work and gratitude, but his doting nature always won out. How could I argue with a father who just wanted to give his daughter the world? I should have seen the warning signs when Lydian brought Damon home. There was something about his smile that never quite reached his eyes, something calculating in the way he talked about investments and inheritance as casually as discussing the weather. But love makes us blind, doesn't it? We see what we want to see, believe what we need to believe. Even now, as I tell you this story, part of me still remembers the little girl who used to fall asleep in my arms, who would bring me dandelions from the garden and call them sunshine flowers. That's the cruelest part of betrayal. It doesn't erase the love. It just twists it into something painful and confusing. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you loved, someone you would have died for, hit that like button, because what I'm about to share with you is a story of how the deepest betrayal can either destroy you completely or forge you into something stronger than you ever imagined possible. My journey begins in a place of perfect happiness, in a life I thought was unshakable. But sometimes the most beautiful foundations hide the deepest cracks, and it wasn't until everything came crashing down that I discovered who I really was underneath it all. Let me take you back to where it all began. to a time when love felt like the strongest force in the universe and trust was as natural as breathing. I was 23 when I first saw Mikhail at a local art gallery. He stood in front of a painting I had created, a watercolor of children playing in falling autumn leaves, and I watched from across the room as he studied every brushstroke with the kind of intensity most people reserve for solving complex problems. When he finally turned around, our eyes met, and I swear the entire world shifted on its axis. "The artist captured something magical here," he said, walking over to me with a smile that made my knees weak. The way the light filters through the leaves, the pure joy on the children's faces, it's like she bottled happiness itself. "She's standing right in front of you," I replied, trying to sound confident despite my racing heart. That was the moment everything changed. Mikhail wasn't just handsome, though with his dark hair and thoughtful eyes he certainly was. He was the kind of man who saw beauty everywhere he looked, who appreciated art not just as decoration, but as windows into the human soul. When he learned I was the artist, his admiration wasn't polite small talk. It was genuine, deep, and it made me feel like my work actually mattered. We spent that entire evening talking about everything and nothing: architecture and art, dreams and fears, the way sunlight hit buildings at different times of day. He told me about his vision for designing homes that weren't just structures, but sanctuaries where families could build memories. I shared my belief that art should comfort and inspire, not just impress. By the time the gallery closed, we both knew something extraordinary was beginning. Our courtship was like something out of a romance novel. Mikhail would leave small sketches under my apartment door, beautiful architectural drawings with little notes about how this window would perfectly frame the morning light for my easel, or how this alcove would be perfect for displaying paintings. I would respond with small watercolors tucked into his office mailbox, scenes of us sharing coffee, walking through parks, building the life we were already dreaming about together. When he proposed 8 months later, he didn't just get down on one knee. This brilliant architect designed and built a miniature version of the house he wanted to create for us, complete with tiny rooms mapped out for our future. The ring was nestled in the little art studio he had planned, and when I opened the tiny door, I found a note that read, "Will you help me build our masterpiece?" How could any woman say no to that? Our wedding was small but perfect. Just close friends and family in the garden of the home where we would start our married life. Mikhail had spent months designing and overseeing every detail of its construction, and I had filled it with carefully chosen pieces that reflected both our personalities. Every room told a story. The kitchen where we would share morning coffee and late-night conversations. The living room with its large windows where I could paint while he worked on blueprints at his drafting table. The master bedroom with built-in bookshelves because we both loved to read before falling asleep. But it was the small nursery that revealed our deepest hopes. Even though we weren't expecting yet, Mikhail had designed the most beautiful child's room, complete with built-in toy storage and a reading nook where bedtime stories would come to life. "One day," he would say, running his hands over the carefully crafted details, "one day this room will be filled with laughter." That day came 2 years later when Lydian was born. Have you ever held your newborn child for the first time and felt like your heart might actually burst from the intensity of love flooding through you? That's what I experienced the moment they placed her tiny, perfect body in my arms. She had Mikhail's dark hair and my green eyes, and when she wrapped her impossibly small fingers around mine, I knew I would do anything, absolutely anything, to protect and nurture this precious life. Mikhail was completely smitten. The strong, successful man would rush home from important business meetings just to watch Lydian sleep. He would sing Russian lullabies his grandmother had taught him.
his deep voice gentle and soothing. When she took her first steps, he built her a custom playhouse that was essentially a miniature architectural marvel. When she showed interest in my art, he converted part of his home office into a child-sized studio where she could create her own masterpieces. I made the decision to step back from my own art career without any hesitation. While other artists my age were pursuing gallery showings and building their reputations, I was teaching Lydian to mix colors and showing her how shadows could bring a drawing to life. I was reading bedtime stories with different voices for each character and turning ordinary afternoons into adventures through imagination. Did I miss my art sometimes? Of course. But every sacrifice felt like an investment in something more beautiful than any painting I could create. I was helping Mikhail build his architectural firm while raising our daughter to appreciate beauty, kindness, and creativity. I was the foundation that allowed him to reach for his dreams while ensuring Lydian grew up feeling completely loved and supported. Comment below if you've ever put your family before your career, because I want you to know that every moment I spent nurturing them instead of pursuing my own ambitions felt like the most important work I could possibly do. But even in those blissful early years, there were tiny cracks beginning to form in our perfect world. Mikhail's success brought financial comfort we had never expected, and his generous heart wanted to share every blessing with Lydian. The expensive toys became designer clothes, became luxury vacations. What started as a father's love was slowly becoming something that would change our daughter in ways we couldn't foresee.
They say hindsight is 20/20, but sometimes when you're living inside a situation, you can't see the forest for the trees. The changes in Lydian didn't happen overnight. They were subtle shifts that I kept explaining away because I loved her too much to believe what was happening right in front of me. By the time Lydian turned 16, our sweet, creative daughter had transformed into someone I barely recognized. The girl who used to bring me wildflowers and spend hours painting beside me now rolled her eyes when I suggested family art time. Instead, she spent her afternoons at the mall with friends whose parents had even more money than we did, coming home with shopping bags full of clothes that cost more than most families spend on groceries in a month. "Mom, you don't understand," became her favorite phrase whenever I tried to talk to her about gratitude or responsibility. "Everyone at school has this stuff. I can't be the only one without the latest designer bag." Mikhail would just smile and hand over his credit card. "She's only young once, Eleonora," he would say when I tried to express my concerns. "Let her enjoy herself." But it wasn't enjoyment I saw in Lydian's eyes when she got these expensive gifts. It was expectation. The excitement that used to light up her face when receiving even small presents was gone, replaced with an entitled assumption that luxury was simply her birthright. The real alarm bells should have started ringing when she turned 18 and announced she was dropping out of college after just one semester, not because she had found her passion or wanted to pursue a different path, but because attending classes was boring, and she had met someone who could provide for her in ways that made education seem unnecessary. That someone was Damon. I'll never forget the first time she brought him home for dinner. He walked into our house like he was evaluating real estate, his eyes sweeping over our furniture, artwork, and architectural details with an appraising gaze that made my skin crawl. When Mikhail showed him the custom-built entertainment center he had designed for our living room, Damon's response wasn't admiration, it was calculation. "Beautiful craftsmanship," he said, running his fingers along the woodwork. "This must have cost a fortune. You've got quite the asset portfolio here." Asset portfolio. Who talks about someone's home in terms of financial investments? But Lydian hung on his every word like he was reciting poetry.
Damon was handsome in a polished, artificial way, perfectly styled hair, expensive clothes, and a smile that he could turn on and off like a light switch. He claimed to work in financial consulting, though when I asked for specifics, his answers were always vague. He drove a luxury car he couldn't possibly afford on a legitimate salary, and he had opinions about everyone else's money that felt inappropriate for someone we had just met. During that first dinner, he steered every conversation toward finances. When Mikhail mentioned his latest architectural project, Damon wanted to know about profit margins. When I shared that I was considering returning to painting now that Lydian was grown, he immediately asked whether there was real money in art or if it was just a hobby. Damon is so smart about investments, Lydian gushed after he left. He's going to help us make so much more money from Daddy's business. Us. Help us. As if this stranger who had been in our lives for 3 weeks was already part of our family financial planning? Mikhail, bless his trusting heart, saw Damon's interest in his business as flattery rather than reconnaissance. When Damon started asking detailed questions about the firm's client list, ongoing projects, and future expansion plans, Mikhail interpreted it as genuine curiosity from a young man who wanted to understand his girlfriend's family. I saw it differently. I saw a predator studying his prey. The phone calls started about 6 months after they got married in a rushed ceremony that felt more like a business transaction than a celebration of love. Always the same pattern. Lydian would call sounding stressed and overwhelmed, explaining that they had found this amazing investment opportunity, or that Damon's car had broken down and they needed just a small loan to get back on their feet. "It's only temporary, Mom," she would assure me. "Damon's big deal is about to go through and we'll pay you back with interest." Mikhail never said no. 5,000 here, 10,000 there, always with the promise that this would be the last time. But the calls kept coming, and the amounts kept getting larger. Our conversations with Lydian became purely transactional. No more questions about how we were doing, no interest in sharing what was happening in their lives beyond their immediate financial needs. I watched my husband's face during these calls, saw how the light in his eyes dimmed a little more each time his beloved daughter reduced their relationship to a series of monetary requests. But when I tried to talk to him about setting boundaries, he would just shake his head sadly. "She's our only child, Eleonora. If we don't help her, who will?" What I wanted to say was that we weren't helping her, we were enabling her. We were teaching her that love could be measured in dollar signs and that family existed to solve financial problems rather than share emotional connections. But I kept quiet because challenging Mikhail's generosity felt like questioning his love for our daughter. And the last thing I ever wanted was to come between a father and his child. How could I have known that my silence was exactly what they were counting on? There are moments in life that divide everything into before and after. For me, that moment came on a Tuesday morning in March when Mikhail collapsed in our kitchen while making coffee. One second, he was humming an old Russian folk song, reaching for his favorite mug from the cabinet we had chosen together 28 years earlier. The next second, he was on the floor, his face twisted in pain, his body convulsing in ways that made my blood turn to ice water. "Mikhail!" I screamed, dropping to my knees beside him, my hands shaking as I tried to support his head. His eyes were wide with confusion and terror, and in that moment, I saw my strong, brilliant husband transform into someone fragile and afraid. The ambulance ride felt like it lasted forever, and no time at all. I held his hand while paramedics worked around us, whispering every prayer I could remember from childhood, making deals with God I knew I couldn't keep. "Please," I begged silently, "not him, not now. We still have so much life left to live."
The diagnosis hit like a physical blow to my chest. Aggressive pancreatic cancer with metastases to his liver and lungs. Stage 4. Terminal. How long? I asked the oncologist, my voice barely a whisper. With aggressive treatment, possibly 18 months. Without treatment, perhaps 6 weeks. 18 months. After 30 years of marriage, of building dreams together, of planning to grow old side by side, we had 18 months if we were lucky. Have you ever had to watch someone you love fight for their life, knowing that every day could be the last? Have you ever had to become strong enough for two people when you feel like you're falling apart yourself? That's where I found myself. And I made a promise right there in that sterile hospital room. I would fight for every single day, every single breath, every single moment we had left. What followed was a year that redefined the meaning of exhaustion. I became Mikhail's full-time advocate, researcher, nurse, and guardian angel all rolled into one. My days started at 5 in the morning, preparing his medications and the special diet his doctors recommended. I organized pill containers, tracked symptoms, researched clinical trials, and made countless calls to insurance companies who seemed more interested in denying claims than helping patients. The first surgery was to remove part of his pancreas. I spent 14 hours in the waiting room, pacing the halls, drinking terrible coffee, and praying to every deity I could think of. When the surgeon finally came out to tell me the operation was successful, I collapsed in relief. But successful was relative. Recovery was brutal. Mikhail, who had always been so independent, now needed help with everything. Getting dressed, walking to the bathroom, even holding a cup of water, all tasks that required assistance. I learned to give injections, change surgical dressings, and recognize the subtle signs that might indicate infection or complications. The second surgery came 3 months later, when scans showed the cancer had spread. Then the third, to address complications from the second. Each operation took a little more out of him, leaving behind a man who looked increasingly like a shadow of the vibrant architect I had married. By the fourth surgery, our beautiful home had transformed into a medical facility. Hospital beds, oxygen tanks, IV poles, and monitoring equipment filled the rooms where we used to dance to jazz music and host dinner parties. The art studio where I had once painted had become a pharmacy, shelves lined with prescription bottles and medical supplies. I lost track of time during those months. Days blended into nights, punctuated only by medication schedules and doctor's appointments. I slept in a chair beside his bed, ready to wake up at the first sign he needed anything. My own health became irrelevant. When did I last eat a real meal? When had I last showered? When had I last looked in a mirror? None of it mattered compared to keeping Mikhail comfortable and fighting. The worst part wasn't the physical exhaustion, though. It was watching this brilliant man, who had designed buildings that would outlast us both, struggle to remember simple words. The medications and the disease itself were stealing pieces of his mind, leaving him confused and sometimes frightened. He would wake up not knowing where he was, and I would have to gently remind him that he was home, that he was safe, that I was there. "You are my strength, Eleonora," he would whisper during his clearer moments, his once strong hands now fragile in mine. "You are my constant, my anchor. I don't know how I would face this without you." Those words became my lifeline, the fuel that kept me going when I felt like I couldn't take another step. It was during this darkest period, when I was running on nothing but determination and coffee, that Lydian and Damon reappeared in our lives. I hadn't heard from them in months, not during the initial diagnosis, not during the first few surgeries,
not during the worst nights when I thought we might lose him. But suddenly, as Mikhail entered his 6th month of treatment, they started showing up at the hospital with concerned expressions and homemade casseroles. "Mom, we're so sorry we haven't been around more," Lydian said, embracing me with what felt like genuine warmth. "We didn't want to intrude while you and Dad were dealing with everything." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope that wasn't related to medical test results. My daughter was back. The loving, caring girl I had raised was finally showing up when we needed her most. Damon stood behind her, his expression appropriately somber. "We know how hard this must be for both of you." He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "We want to help however we can." They offered to sit with Mikhail while I went home to shower and rest. They brought groceries and helped with household tasks that had been neglected for months. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't carrying the entire burden alone. I was so grateful for their support that I didn't notice how their conversations with Mikhail always happened when I stepped out of the room. I didn't pay attention to the documents Damon would bring from Mikhail to review, explaining them as insurance paperwork and estate planning updates. I was so desperate for help, so exhausted from months of caregiving, that I welcomed them with open arms. I had no idea they were positioning themselves like vultures, waiting for the perfect moment to strike.
Looking back, I can see how carefully they planned every move, how methodically they destroyed my husband's trust in me while positioning themselves as our saviors. But when you're living in the middle of a medical crisis, when you're surviving on 3 hours of sleep and your world has shrunk to the size of a hospital room, you don't see the manipulation happening right under your nose. Lydian and Damon's visits became more frequent after Mikhail's 7th surgery. They would arrive with flowers and concerned smiles, always asking how they could help. Damon would insist on reviewing our medical bills, claiming he wanted to make sure the insurance companies weren't taking advantage of us during such a difficult time. "You shouldn't have to worry about finances on top of everything else," he would say, his voice full of false sincerity. "Let me handle the paperwork so you can focus on Dad's recovery." I was so grateful. Here was someone offering to lift the administrative burden from my shoulders, someone who understood complicated financial documents better than I did. When you're drowning, you don't question the person throwing you a life preserver. But what I didn't know was that every document I signed, every paper I handed over, every moment of trust I gave them was another thread in the web they were weaving around us. Their manipulation of Mikhail was even more insidious. They would wait until I left the room to get coffee, to speak with doctors, to make phone calls to insurance companies. And then they would lean in close to his hospital bed, their voices low and concerned. "Dad, we've been looking at your financial statements," Lydian would say, her tone carefully crafted to sound worried rather than accusatory. "There are some transactions that don't make sense. Large withdrawals, payments to vendors we can't identify." Of course there were large withdrawals. I was paying medical bills that insurance refused to cover, hiring private nurses for the nights I couldn't stay awake anymore, purchasing experimental treatments that might give us more time together. But they presented these necessary expenses as evidence of my financial incompetence. Damon would pull out bank statements, legitimate documents that he had somehow obtained access to, and point to specific line items with a furrowed brow. "This payment here for $15,000 to Alternative Wellness Solutions. Do you remember authorizing this?" Mikhail, his mind clouded by pain medication and the effects of chemotherapy, would stare at the papers with confusion. That $15,000 had paid for a clinical trial treatment his oncologist had recommended, but in his weakened state, surrounded by complex financial jargon, it looked suspicious even to him.
I, I don't remember, he would admit, and I could see the doubt creeping into his eyes. We're not saying Mom is doing anything wrong intentionally, but handling this much financial pressure while caring for you, maybe she's just overwhelmed and making mistakes. They were painting me as incompetent at best, potentially deceptive at worst. And the cruelest part was that they were using Mikhail's own generosity and love for me against both of us. They knew he would want to protect me from financial stress, so they presented their intervention as a way to help me, not hurt me. The legal documents started appearing during his 9th surgery. While Mikhail was under anesthesia and I was pacing the surgical waiting room, Damon would be at home preparing what he called protective measures for our family's financial security. I've been researching estate planning, he told me one evening as I sat exhausted beside Mikhail's hospital bed. There are ways to structure your assets that could save tens of thousands in taxes and protect Mom's inheritance if something happens to Dad. He used words I didn't understand: revocable trust, durable power of attorney, beneficiary designation updates. But he explained everything in terms of protecting me, securing my future, making sure I would be financially comfortable if the worst happened. The last thing Dad would want is for you to struggle with complicated legal processes while you're grieving, Lydian added, taking my hand in what felt like genuine compassion. This way, everything will be streamlined and simple. Simple. That word should have been a red flag, but I was too tired to think critically. I wanted things to be simple. I wanted someone else to handle the complex details so I could focus on what mattered most, spending whatever time we had left with the man I loved. When they presented the documents for signing, it was after Mikhail's 10th surgery, during one of his worst recovery periods. He had developed an infection that left him weak and confused, barely able to stay awake for more than 20 minutes at a time. The medications had increased to manage his pain, leaving his once sharp mind in a constant fog. "Dad, we need to get these papers signed while you're able," Damon explained, spreading the documents across the hospital bedside table. The lawyer said timing is crucial for the tax implications. I watched Mikhail struggle to focus on the papers, his hand shaking as he tried to hold the pen. Everything in me wanted to stop this, to tell them we could wait until he was feeling stronger. But they had spent months convincing me that delay would cost us financially. "Just sign here and initial there," Damon guided him, pointing to signature lines while explaining each document in terms so complex that even I couldn't follow them. "This protects Eleonora's inheritance rights. This ensures the business assets are preserved. This streamlines the probate process." Mikhail signed everything they put in front of him, and when they needed a witness signature, I signed too, trusting that my daughter and son-in-law had our best interests at heart. "There," Lydian said with what looked like relief when the last signature was complete. "Now you don't have to worry about any of this legal stuff anymore. We'll handle everything from here." What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that those documents stripped me of everything. The new will left me with a token amount, barely enough to cover a year's expenses, while transferring the vast majority of Mikhail's assets to Lydian and Damon. The power of attorney gave them immediate control over his business, his investments, his bank accounts. They had convinced my dying husband that he was protecting me when he was actually destroying my future. They had used his love for me as a weapon against me, and they had done it all while positioning themselves as the caring children who just wanted to help their family through a crisis. The 11th surgery was the last one. Mikhail's body simply couldn't take any more. As he lay in the intensive care unit, machines keeping him alive while we made the impossible decision to let him go, Lydian and Damon stood beside me, with tears in their eyes, holding my hands, whispering words of comfort. I thought they were grieving with me. I thought we were facing this loss together as a family. I had no idea they were already planning how to get rid of me so they could claim their prize. The betrayal was complete, but the final act was still to come.
Mikkel died the way he had lived, with quiet dignity and grace. After a year of fighting, of enduring surgeries and treatments that tested every limit of human endurance, his body simply said enough. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath, watching the man who had been my whole world slip away as peacefully as falling asleep. "I love you," I whispered into the sudden silence. "I love you, and I will carry that love with me forever." The grief that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just sadness, it was the complete dismantling of identity. For 30 years, I had been half of a whole. I was Mikkel's wife, Mikkel's partner, the woman who supported his dreams and shared his life. Without him, I didn't know who I was supposed to be. Lydian and Damon arrived at the hospital an hour after he passed, their faces carefully arranged in expressions of shock and sorrow. Lydian threw her arms around me, sobbing against my shoulder, and for a moment I felt like I had my daughter back, the loving child who used to comfort me after nightmares, who used to bring me tea when I was sick. "Oh, Mom," she cried, "I can't believe he's really gone." But even in that moment of shared grief, something felt wrong. Their eyes kept darting around the room, taking inventory of medical equipment, watching the hospital staff as if they were performing grief rather than feeling it. The funeral was a blur of flowers and condolences, of people sharing memories of Mikkel's kindness and brilliance. I moved through it all like a ghost, accepting hugs and words of sympathy while feeling completely disconnected from everything happening around me. Lydian and Damon stayed close to my side, handling details I couldn't focus on, accepting visitors on my behalf. "Mom needs time to process," I heard Lydian explaining to concerned friends. "We're taking care of everything so she can just focus on healing." 3 days after we buried my husband, they presented me with what they claimed was his final wish. "Dad made us promise something before he died," Lydian said, settling into the chair across from me in the living room where Mikkel and I used to read together every evening. "He wanted his ashes scattered in a very specific place, the cove in Erebos, where you two spent your honeymoon." Erebos. I hadn't thought about that beautiful coastal town in years, but the memory hit me like a physical blow. We had been so young, so hopeful, standing on those cliffs overlooking the ocean and making promises about the life we would build together. It was where Mikkel had first told me he wanted to design a house for us someday, where I had painted watercolors of the sunrise while he sketched architectural details of the local buildings. "He said you should be the one to do it," Damon added, his voice soft with apparent emotion. "He wanted you to have that closure, to say goodbye in the place where your love story really began." The idea pierced through my numbness like sunlight through storm clouds. The thought of returning to that sacred place, of honoring our beginning while accepting our ending, felt like exactly what my shattered heart needed. "We've already booked everything. The flight, a beautiful hotel overlooking the water. We thought you might need a change of scenery to help you start healing." I should have questioned why they had made arrangements before asking me.
I should have wondered why they were so insistent on this particular trip happening immediately. But grief had stripped away my ability to think critically. All I could feel was gratitude that my daughter was taking care of me during the darkest period of my life. The flight to Erebos was long and exhausting. I had barely slept since Mikkel's death, and my body felt like it was running on empty. Lydian and Damon were attentive during the journey, making sure I drank water and ate small snacks, covering me with blankets when I dozed fitfully in my seat. "Just rest, Mom," Lydian whispered, stroking my hair the way I used to stroke hers when she was little. "We'll take care of everything." I had packed light for what they told me would be a short trip, just a small carry-on bag with a change of clothes, some toiletries, and my passport. Everything else, including the urn with Mikkel's remains and what I thought were important documents related to his estate, went into a larger suitcase that Damon insisted on handling. "It's too heavy for you," he had said, lifting the bag with what seemed like genuine concern. "Let me take care of this." The Erebos airport was smaller than I remembered, filled with the chaos of tourists and local travelers, the foreign language spoken around us, the unfamiliar currency exchange signs, the general confusion of arriving in a place I hadn't visited in decades. All of it left me feeling disoriented and dependent on Lydian and Damon to navigate. That's when they struck. "Mom, can you go exchange some money for the taxi while we get the bags sorted?" Damon asked, pointing toward a currency exchange booth across the terminal. "We'll meet you right back here." It seemed like a reasonable request. I was the one with the credit card, and we would need local currency for transportation and meals. I nodded, giving them a tired smile, and made my way through the crowd to the exchange counter. The line was longer than expected, filled with other travelers dealing with the same arrival logistics we were. I stood there for nearly 15 minutes, my mind drifting between memories of my honeymoon and thoughts about the scattering ceremony we would hold for Mikkel. When I finally completed the transaction and turned back toward where I had left them, my heart stopped. They were gone. Not just moved to a different area of the terminal, completely vanished. I rushed back to the spot where we had been standing, my eyes scanning frantically through the crowd. "Lydian!" I called out, my voice swallowed by the noise of the busy airport. "Damon?" But there was no response, no familiar faces turning toward my voice. The suitcase with Mikkel's ashes was gone. The bag with all our important papers was gone. My carry-on bag with my passport and money was gone. All that remained was the small purse I had clutched while standing in the currency exchange line, containing exactly $3 in American currency and a half-empty bottle of water. They had left me standing in a foreign country with nothing. No identification, no money, no way to get home, no way to prove who I was or why I was there. If this story is shocking you, make sure to subscribe, because what happened next will show you exactly what a mother's fury can accomplish when she has nothing left to lose. As the reality of their betrayal crashed over me like a tidal wave, I understood with clear clarity that this had never been about honoring Mikkel's wishes. This had been about getting me as far away from home as possible while they rushed back to claim the inheritance they had stolen. But they had made one crucial miscalculation. They thought they were abandoning a broken, helpless widow who would simply disappear into the chaos of a foreign country. They were about to discover just how wrong they were.
Have you ever been so broken that you literally didn't know how to take the next breath? Standing in that airport terminal, surrounded by strangers speaking a language I barely understood, clutching $3 in a water bottle like they were precious treasures, I experienced a kind of despair I didn't know existed. The first wave of panic hit me like a physical force. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe, my vision blurred with tears I couldn't afford to shed, and my legs felt like they might give out beneath me. This couldn't be happening. My own daughter, the child I had carried for 9 months, nursed through countless illnesses, taught to walk and read and love, couldn't have just abandoned me in a foreign country like a piece of unwanted luggage? But the evidence was right there in front of me. The empty space where they had been standing, the silence where their voices should have been, the terrible, inescapable reality that I was completely and utterly alone. I found a quiet corner near a window and simply sat down on the floor, my back against the wall, my small purse clutched against my chest like armor. For the first time since Mikhail's diagnosis, I allowed myself to completely fall apart. The tears came in waves, not just for this betrayal, but for everything. For losing my husband, for watching him suffer, for the year of my life spent in hospitals, for the naive trust that had led me to this moment. Airport security approached me twice, speaking in rapid bursts of the local language and gesturing for me to move along. But where was I supposed to go? What was I supposed to do? I was a 60-year-old widow with no identification, no money, and no way to prove I belonged anywhere in the world. It was in that lowest moment, when I felt like I might actually dissolve from the sheer impossibility of my situation, that Mikhail's voice came back to me as clearly as if he were sitting beside me. "You are my strength, Eleonora. You are my constant, my anchor." Those words, spoken during his darkest hours, when he was fighting for every breath, became my lifeline. If I had been strong enough to carry him through 11 surgeries, if I had been constant enough to hold our family together during the worst crisis of our lives, then I could find a way to survive this too. I wiped my tears, stood up on shaking legs, and made my first decision as a woman with nothing left to lose. I would not die in this airport terminal. I would find a way to survive, and then I would find a way to make them pay for what they had done. My first priority was basic survival. With $3, I couldn't afford much, but I could buy a small bottle of water and use the remainder to make one phone call. The international calling cards at the airport shop cost more than I had, but I convinced the clerk to let me make a collect call using the airport's phone system. There was only one person I could think of who might help me: Sterling Matthews, Mikhail's longtime friend and business attorney. Sterling had handled our legal affairs for 20 years, and more importantly, he was one of the few people who truly understood my character and would believe my story. "Sterling," I said when his secretary finally accepted the collect charges, my voice breaking with relief at hearing a familiar voice. "It's Eleonora. I'm in terrible trouble and I need your help." I explained everything: the manipulation during Mikhail's illness, the documents I had unwittingly signed, the abandonment at the airport. Sterling listened without interruption, and when he finished, his response gave me the first hope I had felt in days. "Eleonora, I've been trying to reach you for 2 days. Lydian and Damon came to my office yesterday claiming you were having some kind of mental breakdown and asking me to transfer power of attorney to them. Something felt wrong about the whole situation." So they had already started the process of erasing me from my own life. But Sterling's instincts had been right, and now I had at least one ally who knew the truth. "Stay where you are and stay safe," he instructed. "I'm going to start investigating from this end, but you need to find shelter and figure out how to survive until we can get this sorted out."
Finding shelter with $3 seemed impossible until I started walking the streets near the airport and discovered something beautiful about human nature. Even in the darkest circumstances, kindness still exists. I had been walking for hours, my feet aching in shoes designed for short-term comfort rather than survival, when I passed a small bakery with a "Help Wanted" sign in the window. The warm smell of bread and pastries reminded me that I hadn't eaten anything substantial in over a day. Through the window, I could see an elderly woman with silver hair and weathered hands kneading dough with the kind of practiced movements that spoke of decades of experience. Something about her reminded me of my own grandmother. The same quiet strength, the same purposeful focus on her work. I pushed open the door, and the woman looked up with kind but tired eyes. In my broken combination of English and the few words of the local language I remembered from our honeymoon decades ago, I tried to explain my situation. Her name was Maria, and she didn't need to understand every word I spoke to recognize desperation when she saw it. Within minutes, she had placed a bowl of soup and a thick slice of bread in front of me, waving away my attempts to pay with my precious remaining dollars. "Eat," she said in heavily accented English. "We talk after." That simple act of kindness, hot soup offered without questions or judgment, broke something open inside me that had been frozen since the moment I realized I was alone. But these tears weren't tears of despair anymore. They were tears of gratitude, of recognition that even when the people who should love you most betray you, strangers can still offer salvation. Maria listened to my story with the patience of someone who had seen plenty of hardship in her own life. When she finished, she nodded once and made me an offer that changed everything. "You work for me," she said simply. "Clean, help with customers. I give you food, small money, place to sleep in the back room. You get strong again, then you fight." For the first time since standing in that airport terminal, I smiled. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was preparing for war.
The woman who eventually returned home was not the same person they had abandoned at that airport terminal. 3 months of working in Marisia's bakery had transformed me from a broken widow into something far more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. My days in Erebos followed a rhythm that slowly rebuilt both my body and my resolve. I woke before dawn to help Marisia prepare the day's bread, my hands learning to knead dough with the same methodical precision I would later apply to building my legal case. The physical work was healing in ways I hadn't expected. After a year of helplessness watching Mikhail's illness progress, there was profound satisfaction in creating something nourishing with my own hands. But the evenings were when my real work began. Using the computer in the local library, I spent hours researching international law, elder abuse statutes, and the complex web of financial regulations that governed inheritance disputes. I learned about concepts I had never needed to understand before: fiduciary duty, undue influence, capacity challenges. Every article I read, every legal precedent I discovered became another weapon in the arsenal I was quietly building. I documented everything with the obsessive attention to detail of a detective building a murder case. Bank transfer records that Sterling helped me obtain from his end. Medical records showing the timeline of Mikhail's cognitive decline. Phone records proving the pattern of their manipulation. Email chains that revealed their calculated planning. Even photographs I took of my passportless state and the conditions I was living in, evidence of their abandonment that would be impossible to deny. The most crucial piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Marija, despite her limited English, understood enough of my story to recognize injustice when she saw it. She agreed to provide a sworn affidavit detailing my condition when I arrived at her bakery. My lack of identification, money, or resources, and the obvious signs of someone who had been deliberately stranded. "Bad children," she said simply, when I explained what Livian and Damon had done. "Good mother deserves justice." Sterling became my co-conspirator from thousands of miles away. Our weekly phone calls weren't just about legal strategy. They were about patience and timing. We could have moved immediately to challenge the documents, but Sterling understood that a hasty response would allow them to claim I was emotionally unstable, reacting from grief rather than evidence. Instead, we built our case like architects, constructing a building, foundation first, then each floor carefully planned and executed. Sterling gathered financial records, interviewed witnesses who had seen their manipulation during Mikhail's illness, and consulted with specialists in elder abuse law. I provided the detailed timeline and evidence of their abandonment. Most importantly, we discovered something they probably didn't even realize themselves. Their greed had made them careless. In their rush to access Mikhail's assets, they had already begun liquidating investments and making large purchases that created a clear paper trail. The luxury car, the expensive vacation, the down payment on a house that was far beyond what they could afford on their legitimate income, all of it documented in bank records that Sterling subpoenaed. By the time I boarded the plane back home, I wasn't returning as a victim seeking help. I was returning as a prosecutor, armed with evidence, testimony, and an unshakable determination to expose their crimes. The flight home felt surreal after everything I had been through. I sat in the same type of airplane seat where I had once trusted my daughter's promises about honoring her father's wishes. But this time, I wasn't the grieving widow being manipulated by people I loved. I was a woman who had been forged in fire and emerged as something harder than steel. Sterling met me at the airport with a small team of legal professionals. The contrast with my previous arrival couldn't have been more stark. Instead of being abandoned, I was being welcomed by people who understood my value and were committed to fighting for justice. "They have no idea what's coming," Sterling said, as we drove toward the law office where the confrontation would take place. Lydian and Damon had been told only that there were urgent matters regarding Mikhail's estate that required their immediate attention. They had no idea I was back in the country, much less that I had spent 3 months building an ironclad case against them. As I walked into that building the next morning, I felt Mikhail's presence with me stronger than at any time since his death. This wasn't just about recovering stolen assets. This was about honoring the man who had called me his strength, who had trusted me to be his constant. They thought they had destroyed me. Instead, they had created their own destruction. The reckoning had begun.
The conference room at Sterling's office felt like a courtroom where justice was about to be served. I arrived early, positioning myself at the head of the polished mahogany table where I could see their faces the moment they walked through the door. The evidence was organized in neat folders before me: bank statements, medical records, witness testimonies, and most damning of all, the affidavit from Marija detailing exactly how they had left me to die in a foreign country. When the door opened and Lydian walked in, followed by Damon and their attorney,
The collective gasp that escaped their lips was worth every sleepless night I had spent preparing for this moment. Lydian's face went completely white. Her mouth opened and closed like she was trying to speak but couldn't find air. Damon recovered faster, but I could see the calculations racing behind his eyes. How was this possible? How was I here? What did this mean for their carefully executed plan? "Hello, daughter," I said, my voice calm and steady as mountain stone. "Surprised to see me." For several seconds, nobody moved. Their attorney, clearly unprepared for this development, looked between his clients and me with obvious confusion. Sterling sat beside me, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he watched their panic unfold. "Mom?" Lydian finally whispered, sinking into the chair across from me. "We thought we didn't know where—" "You didn't know where I was because you left me stranded in a foreign country with $3 and no identification. You abandoned me at an airport terminal like a piece of garbage you no longer needed." Damon found his voice first, as predators often do when cornered. "That's not what happened. You were confused, grieving. We tried to find you, but you wandered off." "Stop." The single word cut through his lies like a blade. I opened the first folder and withdrew a series of photographs. "These are pictures of me 3 days after you abandoned me, taken at the American consulate when I was trying to get emergency documentation to return home. Notice the timestamp. Notice the condition I was in." I slid the photos across the table. Lydian looked at them and immediately began to cry, whether from shame or fear of being caught, I couldn't tell and no longer cared. "And this," I continued, opening the second folder, "is a sworn affidavit from Marija Petrov, the bakery owner who found me sleeping in doorways and gave me work so I wouldn't starve to death in the streets. She describes my condition in detail. No passport, no money, no way to contact family." Their attorney was frantically taking notes, clearly realizing his clients had lied to him about the circumstances of this case. "But the real masterpiece," I said, opening the third folder, "is this financial analysis of your spending patterns in the weeks immediately following your father's death. Luxury car purchases, expensive vacations, a down payment on a house worth more than your combined annual income. Tell me, how does a young couple afford such luxuries unless they're spending someone else's inheritance?" "We can explain," Damon started, but I held up my hand. "No more lies, no more manipulation, no more using your father's love against me." My voice remained steady, but now it carried an edge that made everyone in the room lean back slightly. "You want to know what you accomplished with your betrayal? You turned a grieving widow into a detective. You gave a broken woman a reason to become stronger than she ever imagined possible." I stood up, my hands flat on the table, looking directly into Lydian's eyes. "Look at me, Lydian. Look at what you created. I am no longer your victim. I am your reckoning." Damon tried one last desperate play. "You can't prove intent. We were trying to help, trying to make sure the estate was properly managed." Sterling finally spoke, his voice cutting through Damon's protests with legal precision. "Actually, we can prove intent. We have recorded phone calls, email exchanges, and witness testimony that clearly document a pattern of elder abuse, financial manipulation, and deliberate abandonment. The district attorney is very interested in this case." The word criminal hung in the air like a death sentence. Their attorney was now openly taking notes about damage control rather than defense strategy.
"Here's what's going to happen," I said, returning to my seat and gathering my evidence folders with calm efficiency. "You are going to return every single asset you stole from my husband's estate. You are going to sign documents restoring me as the rightful beneficiary of his will. You are going to pay restitution for the months of hardship you caused me." I paused, letting the weight of their situation settle over them like a shroud. "Or we go to court, where a jury will hear every detail of how you manipulated a dying man and abandoned a widow in a foreign country, where your greed, your lies, and your cruelty will be examined under oath and preserved in public record forever." Lydian looked at me with red, swollen eyes. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "I know you are. You're sorry you got caught." The battle was over. Justice would be served. But the war for my soul, that victory belonged to me alone.
The legal resolution came swiftly once they understood the full weight of the evidence against them. Faced with a choice between criminal prosecution and complete restitution, Lydian and Damon chose survival over pride. Within 3 weeks, every asset had been returned, every fraudulent document reversed, and my rightful position as Mikhail's sole beneficiary fully restored. But justice measured in dollars and legal documents, while necessary, couldn't heal the deeper wounds or restore what had truly been lost. The money couldn't bring back the year of manipulation that had poisoned Mikhail's final months. It couldn't erase the memory of standing alone in that airport terminal, abandoned by the child I had raised with infinite love. It couldn't rebuild the trust that had been shattered or repair the relationship that might have been salvaged if greed hadn't consumed their hearts so completely. The court didn't just restore my inheritance. They awarded significant punitive damages for the suffering I had endured. The judge, a woman in her 70s who clearly understood the particular cruelty of being betrayed by one's own child, made her feelings known during the final hearing. This case represents one of the most calculating and heartless examples of elder abuse I have encountered in 30 years on the bench, she said, looking directly at Lydian and Damon. To manipulate a dying man and abandon his widow in a foreign country demonstrates a level of cruelty that demands consequences beyond mere restitution. Standing in that courtroom, listening to legal validation of everything I had endured, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before Mikhail's illness: complete peace. The money gave me choices I had never imagined having. I could have lived lavishly, traveled the world, indulged every desire that had been deferred during my years of marriage and caregiving. Instead, I found myself drawn to honor the man whose love had sustained me through the darkest period of my life. I established the Mikhail Foundation, dedicated to supporting families dealing with long-term illness. Having lived through the financial devastation that medical crises can cause, I wanted to ensure other families wouldn't face the impossible choice between proper care and financial survival. The foundation provides grants for experimental treatments, assistance with medical bills that insurance refuses to cover, and most importantly, respite care for caregivers who are drowning in the overwhelming responsibility of keeping their loved ones alive. I sold our family home. The beautiful sanctuary Mikhail had designed for us had become too heavy with memories, both precious and painful. With those proceeds, I purchased a smaller place near the coast where I could wake up to sunrise over the water every morning. The new house has an art studio where I paint again for the first time in decades, creating watercolors that celebrate resilience, survival, and the unexpected strength that emerges from life's greatest trials. Lydian tried to contact me several months after the legal proceedings concluded. Her letter, forwarded through Sterling's office, was full of apologies and pleas for forgiveness. She claimed to have left Damon, said she understood now how wrong they had been, begged for a chance to rebuild our relationship. I read her words carefully, then placed the letter in a box with other documents from this chapter of my life, evidence of both the worst and best of human nature. Perhaps someday, when enough healing has occurred, there might be space for conversation. But forgiveness, I've learned, doesn't require reconciliation, and love doesn't demand that we make ourselves vulnerable to repeated betrayal. My story ends not with revenge, but with redemption. Not theirs, but my own. I discovered that while some betrayals can break your heart, they can also reveal strength you never knew existed. I learned that survival isn't just about enduring tragedy, but about transforming pain into purpose. If this story has moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales of resilience and justice. Share this in the comments. Have you ever had to find strength you didn't know you possessed? Your story matters too. Next week, I'll be sharing another powerful story of a grandmother who discovered her family's shocking secret and used it to reclaim her dignity. You won't want to miss it. Remember, you are stronger than you know, and justice, though sometimes delayed, has a way of finding its mark.